I would like to call the meeting of the Board of Directors of the Des Moines Public Schools to order for April 3rd, 2018. Please take the roll.
Natasha Newcomb. Ms. Delagardelle Shelley.
Here.
Ms. Langford.
Here.
Ms. Caldwell-Johnson.
Here.
Ms. Ellsburn.
Here.
Ms. Anderson.
Here.
Mr. Barron.
Here.
The first item on our agenda this evening is approval of the agenda. Are there any special requests from board members? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion and a second to approve the agenda.
I'll move approval.
We have a motion from Ellsburn and a second from DeLaGardelle Shelley. Please vote. Is that you? Oh, I'm sorry, a second from Langford. It came from that side. Motion passes 6-0. The next item on our agenda is the approval of the minutes from the March 20th, 2018 meeting. I would entertain a motion and a second to approve the meeting minutes.
So moved.
We have a motion from DeLaGardelle Shelley and a second from Anderson. Any discussion or corrections? Hearing none, please vote. Motion passes 6-0. The next item on our agenda is district recognitions. I'll turn it over to the superintendent.
Good evening, board. One of the most rewarding things about my work is the knowledge that so many people in this community care about our students and are willing to provide support in ways both big and small. From individuals to businesses to the faith community to nonprofit organizations, we have many partners helping us in our very important work. Maureen Griffin of Hoover High School told me about the work of the Meredith Reformed Church and their support of many of our students at Hoover. And I wanted to invite them here to say thank you for their support. For the better part of the past year, church members have worked with a team from Hoover on ways they could help our neediest students. Their help has come in many different ways, with much of it directed to ELL students who make up more than a third of the enrollment at Hoover High School. So at this time, I'd like to ask Maureen and her guests to please join me to share a little bit more about their partnership on behalf of the Hoover community and their students. Maureen and guests.
Thank you, everybody. It's really wonderful to be here. I'm usually here with a different hat, but tonight it's to recognize an incredible partner that we have found in the Meredith Reformed Church. I want to introduce the pastor of the church. This is Suzanne Vogel, the pastor for the junior church students, Josh DeCock, and Steve Zickick, a member of the church, a proud representative from the area director of the FCA as well. And also with me tonight is Ann Minks, who's one of our ELL teachers, who has a few words to say. I promise not to take too long, but this is really special. As you know, as a board, we took in a tremendous amount of ELL students this time last year. Like at Hoover, we welcomed in the ninth grade class alone almost 135 students in this time last year in a 1-month period, and it overwhelmed us. And looking toward their next year, this year, we were concerned about what we could do for them as 10th graders. So I sought this group out, who was a friend of a friend. We met over the summer, we met early in the fall, and we talked about what are the ways that they can help support this group of students particularly. So using MAP scores, using all the data we could to figure out where these kids were, both academically, socially, all of that. We set some targets for what we wanted to accomplish with this group of students. And of course, whenever you target just a few students, you end up hitting a lot more. These people came to the cause without any problem. I'm gonna let Ann talk first about her relationship and how they have supported her, if you don't mind.
Good evening. On behalf of the Hoover community, I would like to thank the Meredith Reformed Church for their service in our school. Like Maureen said, my name is Ann Minks, and I'm an ELL teacher at Hoover High School. Although I cannot speak to everything the volunteers have accomplished over the last few months, I can say they have had a large impact in our classrooms. I've seen numerous volunteers quietly entering and exiting our building many days. The specific class I've received support in is a newcomer reading and writing class. The volunteers Connie, Lynn, Mary, and Amy have been in our classroom since mid-November, and their support has been amazing. Very recently, I asked students to reflect on their progress in class, and when they reached a question asking who they were happy they got to know and who they were thankful for, many of our students named our volunteers. I would like to share a few of their responses with you now. I am happy I got to know Lynn better this semester because help on reading very much. I am happy I got to know Mary and Connie better this semester because was teach me how to read better. I said thank you to them. I am thankful for Connie because she helped me to know how to pronounce the words and what they mean, and she is always smiling. I am thankful for Connie, Mary, and Lynn because they teach me how to be a better reader. As you can see, these volunteers have had a huge impact on our students, and we are very thankful for their time and energy. Finally, I would like to say thank you for your support of not only students, but of teachers as well. I know that when Connie, Mary Lynn, or Amy show up to my room, they make my day a little better. They are there to say, I see what you are trying to do, I support you, I want to help. And in a job that is definitely not always easy, that means the world. So once again, on behalf of Hoover High School, I would like to say thank you to the volunteers of Meredith Reformed Church for your service.
And from Kathy Winger, who was our Meredith Middle School Saturday School adult ed person, she's written a nice note. Dear members of the Meredith Reformed Church, I would like to thank your congregation for supporting our ELL Saturday Family Literacy Program. Your generous donations provided coffee, juice, snacks, and paper products for adult and youth participants. Being able to provide a morning snack is huge for the adults. The coffee and snacks are the catalyst that promotes interaction with classmates during the morning break. When the students have a reason to congregate in the teacher's lounge, they tend to engage with each other over coffee and cookies. The snacks provided for the youth energizing energy in the morning sessions. Being able to provide snacks personalizes the program and shows that we truly care about the individual beyond the instruction and supplies. I again extend my sincere thanks, and I bless all of you for caring about our community. Our Hoover basketball coach, Coach Henderson, wants to reach out and thank you on behalf of the boys basketball team for all your help and support. They can't thank you enough for taking time to cook, provide meals for them before their Friday night games. The boys look forward not only to the meals, but to the fellowship as well. We are extremely fortunate to have you around and excited to continue our relationship. We look forward to your continuing support. I could go on, but I'll stop. But these guys are pretty amazing. It's not just the money. It's not just the books. They're in our classrooms. You know, you hear about that in elementary rooms and middle school parents coming in or adults. We've got them in our rooms in the high school, sitting in the halls during our advisory times, reading to kids. Amazing. So, thank you.
I'll just take a minute and thank you for all your work and energy as a church. One of our core desires is to be a blessing to our neighborhood and to our city. And it has been a privilege for us to get to walk alongside the incredible teachers and staff and administration at Hoover High School and Meredith Middle School. And I know your work is really difficult. So we just want to thank you for all that you do. And we didn't do this to be recognized, but it's really, thank you very much.
Great. Thank you for everything you do.
Thanks for doing this. I appreciate it.
Before continuing with our regular meeting, I would like to remind the audience that we allow any person the opportunity to speak to the board for 5 minutes following the presentation of an agenda item. If anyone wishes to speak to an agenda item, please go to the information table to sign up. Remarks must be germane to the agenda, and we ask that you avoid reference to personalities and character attacks, as those types of comments serve no productive purpose. As a reminder to the board and public, the board will not engage in discussion or deliberation with the speaker regarding comments made to agenda items. Discussion and deliberation will remain among the board members at the board table with speakers' comments informing said discussion, deliberation, and determination as deemed necessary. We appreciate your input. Ms. De La Gardelle Shelley, I believe that you have the consent motion.
I move that the board approve the consent items in accordance with the recommended action for each item on the consent agenda, including bills previously authorized, certified, and approved for payment by the board secretary in the amount of $5,764,761.02.
Is there a second? We have a motion from De La Gardelle Shelley and a second from Anderson. Is there any discussion before we move to the vote? Yes.
Just really quickly, if Dr. Ahart, if you could give a little clarification for the public around the personnel item. There are a couple of directors, new positions being hired, and I know we've been contacted by some folks in the community concerned about this, given we're approving a budget. We have that ahead of us with $14 million in cuts, and I know you've given us an explanation around the net loss of administrators, but if you could just clarify that for public record.
Yeah, so the two new positions are in the what we call the Office of Academics. It's an elementary director of teaching and learning and a secondary director of teaching and learning. Without going through position by position around the district, the net reduction will be 3 administrators district-wide. The reason for these 2 new positions, to try to make it as concise as possible, we currently have a chief academic officer who is retiring at the end of this year. We're not replacing that position. So some of those duties will fall on Matt Smith, our chief schools officer, and some of those will fall on Noel Tickey, our executive director of teaching and learning. We also have currently a supervisor of gifted and talented who's retiring, which is a position that we will also not be replacing. So the elementary director will take on gifted and talented among all of the other duties, and the secondary director will be doing the secondary portion of that role, with the added duty of a project that we've started working on actually a little bit last spring and have really been trying to focus on in an accelerated fashion, which is getting our online opportunities up and running so that we can offer a full complement of classes needed to graduate high school from freshman year all the way to senior year, and then eventually work down possibly even into the middle school level. That's a new venture for the district, one that we need to focus more resources toward, and so to accomplish those two very important tasks, we're reconfiguring the organization as it relates to academics to ensure that we have appropriate person power on those high priority items. I don't know if that covers with enough clarity.
That's helpful.
So there are 2 new positions, but overall there's a net reduction in administrative positions of 3.
Are there any additional board comments or questions before we move to the vote? Yes, Mr. Barron.
You mentioned in the email to us, and then in your verbal comments, the gifted and talented position, and not bringing that back. Can you give some context to how gifted and talented served in the district, and how and whether that impacts how those students will be served? I understand that those responsibilities will be divided between the 2 new directors, but can you give some context to how gifted students are served in the district and what impact that not having a dedicated person in charge of those efforts would have? Yeah, sure. So we'll not actually be splitting it between 2 people. It'll actually be in the elementary. So that'll be part of her responsibilities, although that section of it will be a K-12 responsibility, obviously. Trying to figure out how far back to go. We've made some changes in how we're serving our gifted students, both in terms of areas that we can identify giftedness in. So we've expanded that pretty dramatically. We're the first district in the state to be able to identify students' giftedness in the arts, for instance, particularly dance. It's a very unusual thing, but it's something that we've taken on here in the district. We can also identify giftedness now in leadership.
The other big change in how we've attempted to serve our students, well, two big changes is at the earlier levels, we don't make a decisive determination as to giftedness, but we serve more students. We throw a broader net and provide gifted services for a wider range of students. And that's important primarily because most of the testing, traditional testing to identify giftedness, is really tied to proficiency in the English language, regardless of what area you're trying to identify them in. IQ tests, Iowa Test of Basic Skills scores. That screens out a whole bunch of students who are gifted, but at this point in time, because of ELL or other reasons, they don't have the language skills to be able to prove that. So we're casting a wider net earlier so that we have more students being provided the experiences of the gifted program, and then we get more focused in areas of identification as they progress through the system. So and then the third change is we've increased the number of consultants, we call them, that are serving students. So our consultants are now building-based, so they're housed in buildings. They have much more direct contact with both the students, but also the teacher, the regular classroom teachers, and the administrative staff that support them. So the nature of the supervisory capacity has changed a bit because we're trying to get closer to the students and how they're served. And then finally, as we're doing with everything, equity is a huge piece of how we're attempting to change our gifted program. And so we want that better integrated with how we do all of our other work. So it's not thought of as a one-off, but more integrated, like we're similar to how we're trying to approach special education. So it's an integrated part of the continuum of services that we provide for our students. If that helps answer that.
Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Anderson.
Yeah, I know that you mentioned the reduction of 3 staff and admin. Can you kind of share how that looks on a funding basis, I guess?
For next year, it'll be a reduction a little north of $250,000.
Okay, thanks.
Additional questions or discussion before we move to a vote? Hearing none, we have a motion and a second on the consent items. Please vote. Item passes 6-0. The next item on our agenda is a series of public hearings. I will call the first public hearing to order on item E1, entrance upgrade and office renovation at Capitol View Elementary School. Is there anyone wishing to speak to this item? Anyone wishing to speak to this item? Hearing no one, I'll close the public hearing, and I'll ask the superintendent to please introduce the matter.
I recommend the board approve the proposed plans and specifications prepared by RDG Architects for a renovation project of the office to include an entrance upgrade at Capitol View Elementary School following the public hearing.
May I have a motion and a second to approve the plans at Capitol View?
I'll second.
We have a motion from Anderson and a second from Ellsburn. Are there any questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, we have a motion and a second on the floor. Please vote. Motion passes 6-0. I'll call the next public hearing to order on item number E2, classroom addition for the Central Campus Agronomy Program. Is there anyone wishing to speak to this item? Anyone wishing to speak to this item? Hearing no one, I'll close the public hearing, and I'll ask the superintendent to please introduce the matter.
I recommend the board approve the proposed plans and specifications prepared by Angelo Architects for a classroom addition and storage building addition to the agronomy program following the public hearing.
May I have a motion and a second to approve the plans for the Central Campus Agronomy Program?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion from De La Gardelle Shelley and a second from Barron. Are there any additional questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, we have a motion and a second on the floor. Please vote. Motion passes 6-0. I'll call the next public hearing to order on item number E3, upgrades to the Family Consumer Science and Science Rooms at Callanan Middle School. Is there anyone wishing to speak to this item? Anyone wishing to speak to this item? Hearing no one, we'll close the public hearing, and we'll ask the superintendent to introduce the matter.
I recommend the board approve the proposed plans and specifications prepared by CMBA Architects for upgrades to family consumer science and science rooms at Callahan Middle School following the public hearing.
May I have a motion and a second to approve the plans as described at Callahan Middle School?
Second.
We have a motion from Langford and a second from De La Gardelle Shelley. Are there any additional questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, we have a motion and a second. Please vote. Motion passes 6-0. I'll call the next public hearing to order on item number E4, upgrades to the music rooms and pool at Hoover High School. Is there anyone wishing to speak to this item? Anyone wishing to speak to this item? Hearing no one, we'll close the public hearing, and I'll ask the superintendent to please introduce the matter.
I recommend the board approve the proposed plans and specifications prepared by RDG Architects for a renovation project, which includes upgrades to the music rooms and pool area following the public hearing.
May I have a motion and a second to approve the plans as described at Hoover High School?
So moved.
We have a motion from Ellsburn and a second from Anderson. Any board questions or comments? Hearing none, we have a motion and a second. Please vote. Motion carries 6-0. I'll call the next public hearing to order. Item number E5, upgrade to the kitchen at Wright Elementary School. Is there anyone wishing to speak to this item? Anyone wishing to speak to this item? Hearing no one, we'll close the public hearing, and we'll ask the superintendent to please introduce the matter.
I recommend the board approve the proposed plans and specifications prepared by Angelo Architects for renovation of the existing kitchen at Wright Elementary School following the public hearing.
May I have a motion and a second to approve the kitchen upgrade at Wright Elementary School?
Second.
We have a motion from Langford and a second from De La Gardelle Shelley. Are there any board questions or comments? We have a motion and a second on the floor. Please vote. Item passes 6-0. I will now call the last public hearing to order on item number E6, FY 2019 budget adoption. Is there anyone wishing to speak to this item? Yes. We have one speaker on the budget adoption, Douglas Smith. Name and address for the record.
Absolutely. Doug Smith, 1512 South Lawn Drive in Des Moines. And I also have the honor and privilege of representing nearly 2,400 of your employees at the DMEA. I wanted to talk and call your attention to a few items of the slideshow that's been presented multiple times on the budget. Primarily, slide 11 is what I'd like to speak to today. As I shared with Mr. Linhart during the budget presentation at Roosevelt on Thursday night, I'm a little frustrated with the way the Business and Finance Department put together the presentation, primarily in the last slide where it's got the kind of red, angry, not happy face regarding new state supplemental money and the DMEA settlement. And I'm one that is going to be open, honest, and transparent with everything, and I didn't appreciate the smoke and mirrors on that slide. 1% new money equals just nearly $2.7 million for this district, where my settlement for my employees at 3.28 equaled about $550,000. And so when you look at the line where 1.0 of new money equals, the DMEA settlement at 3.28, it's out of kilter and not apples to apples. So that was quite frustrating to me. But Mr. Linhart will go through the presentation and cover that. And then also, I just want to remind you, in the land of $14 million in reductions, what the district's budget looked like for that from the DMEA lens. That's a net reduction of 36 DMEA-covered hourly positions, whether it be campus monitors, clerks, associates. It's 51 DMEA secondary teachers in our middle and high schools. That's 32 DMEA elementary teachers, for a total FTE reduction of 119 DMEA-covered positions, which actually means 73 fewer classrooms and teachers next year. So I know in putting together the budget, I don't argue line for line, FTE for FTE, but wanted to put that into perspective. And that's based off of all of the information that the district has provided us. So there's nothing, those are actual teaching and classified reductions as far as FTE goes. So I do hold the school district slightly liable for those reductions. I understand the legislature is 95% responsible for those reductions. But I'm disappointed in, Dr. Ahart mentioned the 3 reductions of administrators. I think we could have gone farther from the behind the office staff where it's not classroom touching students teaching wise. So 3 is better than 0, but when you average the 3 against the 119 that actually work with kids on a daily basis, it's troubling. But I understand why we're there. It's the legislature, period. So I just wanted to kind of add some clarity to slide 11, which was very frustrating on my end and the members that I represent, and then just cover the recap positions for the FTE reductions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Is there anyone else wishing to speak for the public hearing? Hearing no one, I will close the public hearing, and I will ask the superintendent to introduce the matter and also our presenter for the evening.
Yes, I recommend the board adopt the proposed budget for FY 2019 following the public hearing in order to submit the budget to Polk County by April 16th, 2018, as required by law. In the absence of our ailing CFO, we have Nick Lenhart, our controller, who has been doing extra duty and an outstanding job of it, to share more about the FY19 budget.
Perfect. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, board. The first thing we're going to do tonight is, some of you have seen this video, but we're going to start off with an introductory video that kind of walks through what the budget process is in this district, some of the challenges we faced in fiscal year 19, and then we'll go back into the presentation and we'll address any questions or concerns. Okay.
Hi, I'm Superintendent Tom Ahart. First, I want to thank you for watching. You obviously care about students and about the future of our community. I appreciate your willingness to share your time with us and learn about the budget process. Des Moines Public Schools serves 33,000 students and employs nearly 5,000 people, making us one of the largest employers in the Des Moines area. Our student body is unique in central Iowa. Minority students make up the majority of enrollment. 73% of our students qualify for free and reduced lunch. 20% are English language learners, and nearly 15% are special education students. Creating a budget for a district as large as Des Moines Public Schools takes time and the involvement of many different stakeholders, including school personnel, business and finance professionals, the school board, and citizens like you. The process begins each year in September and continues through April 15th, the deadline mandated by the state of Iowa. It reflects the labor, materials, and resources required to fulfill the goals and objectives established by the school board. Some important things to remember about a school district budget in Iowa. First, school districts have restricted funding sources, meaning some funds may be spent only for certain purposes. The budget is student-driven, and the amount we can spend per student is set by the legislature, a concept called spending authority. And finally, growth in spending authority happens in only 3 ways: an increase in student enrollment, an increase in miscellaneous income, or finally, an increase in supplemental state aid.
Hi, I'm Terry Caldwell-Johnson, Chair of the Des Moines School Board. Supplemental aid is one of our most important funding sources, and as Dr. Ahart said, is one of the only ways we can increase our spending authority. But take a look at how the state funding has changed, and not for the best. For more than 2 decades, 1973 to 1994, the annual rate of growth was set by a nonpartisan funding formula that incorporated various economic factors. The annual rate for those decades was nearly 6.5%. For the next 15 years, after growth was no longer set by a neutral formula, but decided instead through the legislature, the annual rate dipped to nearly 3.2%. Since 2011, school districts in Iowa have managed to educate more than 500,000 students each year, with an average increase in state aid of just 1.7%. At this rate, while student needs and our reserves, represented by the light blue, green, and yellow lines, remain nearly matched, the state's underfunding will put us in the red as soon as the year 2020. We often hear phrases such as, the majority of the state's budget is spent on education, and it should be, since state public schools continue to serve nearly 94% of all of Iowa's children. Well-funded schools are better able to attract and retain high-quality teachers, provide individualized attention through class size, and provide an engaging curriculum that includes art and music, all the things that promote high academic achievement. Making sure all Iowa's children receive a quality education is essential for the future of the state of Iowa. For you see, the students we educate today are indeed the workforce of our future.
I'm Nick Linhart, Controller of the Department of Business and Finance. While hoping for the best but planning for the worst, the district anticipated the state would slow growth and spending authority. Consequently, we have been extremely careful in managing our resources. We have achieved efficiencies wherever possible and continue to look for more. We have worked hard to lower operational costs while improving the quality of services for students and families. From aggressive work to improve energy efficiency to centralized printing, we have reduced cost for some of our largest non-employee related expenditures. At the same time, we have continued to reduce cost in staff compensation. However, more than 80% of our budget goes to staff compensation and benefits. When we've had to reduce staff, we've been careful to adjust staffing in such a way that no one loses their job. This year, we must reduce staff again. There will be administrative, teacher, and operations reductions around the district. But again, due to careful planning, including the retirement incentive that we offered last fall, we will again avoid having to pink slip anyone. With careful, advanced planning and behind-the-scenes work, we have reached a point of reducing the district's budget by the $14 million required to stay within spending authority limits for fiscal year 2019.
The state legislature only approved a 1% increase for school districts this session, leaving us with no choice but to cut $14 million, and not without consequences. Given the political climate in Iowa, my fear is that 0 to 2% supplemental state aid is the new normal for school districts, and the years of regular 4% increases are a thing of the past. While school districts have also seen an increase in categorical funding from the state, those funds can only be spent on certain programs, not for general education purposes. Supplemental state aid is vital as costs paid for with the general fund, such as health care, compensation, fuel, goods and services, and more, continue to rise. We are actively engaged with our legislators to better support our public schools. If you feel compelled to support our students and teachers, there are things you can do to help. The Community Legislative Action Team, or CLAT, a group of engaged parents and community members led by a committee of the DMPS Board of Directors, is a great place to start. More information about CLAT may be found online at dmschools.org under the School Board tab, on Facebook, or by calling 242-7713. Thank you for your engagement with Des Moines Public Schools, and thank you for attending the DMPS Budget Forum for fiscal year 2019.
Now that we have the video as a background, that was our first year attempt at trying something a little bit different to try to engage a little broader audience than what we typically can see from the budget forums. We understand the budget forums are taxing if you're a single parent or a dual income parent, and they're tough to get to. So this was our attempt. We've put this out on the district's website. We've put it in the budget documents. We'll continue to get better at evolving it more from a virtual platform. But the things that we'll talk about tonight are essentially what's required from a budgetary adoption perspective. The first thing that we'll walk through is just the general timeline. And I know that $14 million of cuts is not easy. That's not lost on any of us. We wish and hoped that that wouldn't be the situation, but the reality is we do have to adopt a balanced budget. We have to adopt one in the state of Iowa that essentially ensures that our revenue and our expenditures, our revenue is higher than our expenditures. The other thing, the particular problem that we walk through in that video is we have a spending authority issue.
Thank you.
We have a fund balance in our general fund in excess of $70 million. The issue is, in the very near future, and we'll get through some of these slides, we're not going to have the legal authority to be able to spend that fund balance. That's what leads to the $14 million of expenditure reductions. So a lot of that is driven by what you saw in the video, but the timeline, the series of events that we have to go through in Iowa is very prescriptive, and it starts with the public notice that we're going to adopt a budget on April 16th, and you kind of work backwards from there. We're legally required to have one budget forum. The district had 4 public budget forums and then the public video. We had a public forum on these dates listed here in each of the director districts, and we had good turnout considering it's a budget forum at 6:30 at night during the middle of the week, and spring hasn't quite got to where it should be. So we averaged about 11 or 12. It was a good process, lots of great questions, lots of concerns shared, but we continue to kind of move and evolve and go forward. We did have some legislator support at these meetings, and that was always nice to see. It kind of shows the good work that CLAT's doing. So working through that, we're here tonight on April 3rd, essentially asking for approval to adopt the budget in its current form. The next logical step, assuming that approval would go through, would be file it with the county on April 16th, and then starting April 17th, it's 2020 budget season. The budget cycle never really stops, is the point there. It just keeps going. You saw this slide, but I think it's a really important slide for the community at large. I think it's an important slide for the board. I think it's an important slide for the 4,800 staff members. I'm even beginning to think it's a pretty important slide for 33,000 students. What you see here is a downward progression at the state level funding. In Iowa, the vast majority of our revenue is driven by kid count. It's also driven by the amount of state supplemental aid that we receive through the legislative process. What you can see on this slide that Terry articulated very well is that the funding levels aren't quite where they need to be. And as our public speaker, Doug, alluded to, we're not quite getting the amount of revenue in with the expenditures that we're spending out. And that's a strategy that we've chose to impose to ensure that we're paying our people competitively, we're keeping our people engaged and employed, but at a certain point, we have to make sure that the budget's balanced. Here's what the future holds before we get into fiscal year 19. What's on here in fiscal year 19 is we've already assumed 1% state supplemental aid because we know it. We did assume in 20, 21, 22, and 23, 1% state supplemental aid because, while again, hoping for the best, the reality is that's the normal that we've seen in the last several years, and we want to make sure we're budgeting conservatively. The numbers to kind of draw your attention on here are the 0.5% and the 2.2 million. Those are the spending authority parameters that we're talking about, because again, in the state of Iowa, regardless of how much cash we have, regardless of how much fund balance we have, if we don't have the authority, we can't spend. The repercussions of that can be severe. It can lead to a state takeover. That's not something that any of us have any kind of interest in. So we're going to do everything we can to make sure that we stay within the spending authority. So the fiscal year 19 does assume $14 million of expenditure reductions. Of that $14 million, roughly $4.2 million of it, or 57 positions, are through staffing. That means the other 10 million are through other initiatives. And when you think about that, that's not wonderful. We don't enjoy that. But with a budget that's made up of 82% in the general fund that goes to compensation, the fact that we were able to hit that $14 million number with 33% reduction of compensation kind of shows that we continue to try to work outside the box to avoid as many staff reductions as possible. And we were able to do that for the last several years. We've been able to do it for the last several years very quietly. This year, 14 million is a big number, harder to be a little bit quieter, but we were able to do that through attrition. We were able to do that through the retirement incentive. We were able to work to place people, so again, that we don't have to pink slip. We're trying to disrupt the system as the least amount possible. But what happens in 2020, 2021, 2022, this graphic is meant to show what happens if we make no reductions going forward, if we don't intervene. And you can see it doesn't take long. It's essentially halfway through 2020 where we would be out of spending authority. And that's not our objective. Some of the questions that got brought up in the public forum were, so you have to cut $5 million. We want a little bit of a cushion in the spending authority so that if somebody accidentally leaves lights on in a building longer than they should, we're not having to redo all of our calculation. It's prudent financial management. So again, this is just meant to show what the future holds if all the assumptions stay in the same spot. The budget parameters are pretty well defined for us. They're set through the board management limitations 2.6. Essentially what that states is we need to present a budget where revenues exceed expenditures and that we hit certain financial metrics. One of the financial metrics is 15% solvency ratio. The budget that's presented before you is very close to that. It's at 14.8%. Solvency ratio is cash. It's cash on hand at a point in time. That's really all it is. It's put in place to ensure that in the points in time where we don't get revenue in from the state or other sources, we can continue to meet our obligations. Payroll, accounts payable, utility bills, so on and so forth. The other one is the 15% unspent ratio for the general fund. 15% is our target. You saw on the previous slide, the budget we're presenting in front of you is 0.5%. The reason why we're doing that is if we were to try to present a budget at 15% unspent, the number would be much greater than 14 million, and that would significantly disrupt the system. And again, that's what we're trying to avoid as much as possible. Okay. What assumptions did we utilize in building this budget? Some of these are assumptions, some of these are known. The one that we'd like to call your attention to a little bit is enrollment. The way that state supplemental aid increases, and again, spending authority in the state of Iowa, the way spending authority increases, which again, that's the number that we're most focused on right now. There's only 3 ways that can increase, as alluded to in that video. Increases in enrollment, increases in state supplemental aid, or allowable growth, whichever term you're most familiar with, and increases in miscellaneous income, which are grants. If we walk through those 3 just real briefly, the grants, there's a lot of discussion at the federal level, and 40 million of our 60 million in grants come from federal sources. There's lots of discussion back and forth about potentially cutting some of those federal programs. There's also discussion about increasing some of the federal programs. Where we feel is we're best served to keep that flat. We're not expecting a windfall. The last windfall of significance that we saw with federal funding was back in 2008 when the markets crashed, and it was through ARA. Okay, so we're going to hold that one flat. That's one assumption. The other assumption for supplemental or spending authority is state supplemental aid, and again, we're assuming 1% as we walk through in that chart. The third one is enrollment growth. And there's been some changes at the federal level through administration post-election that haven't been pro-refugee, pro-immigration. And for those of you who haven't followed enrollment as closely as some of us at Des Moines Public Schools, the vast majority of our our enrollment growth, and we have increased over the last 5 years, and we're one of the few urban districts that be fortunate enough to increase. Most of our enrollment growth has came in the form of refugees and immigration, whether through first settlement or secondary migration. Right now, we're anticipating enrollment to be completely flat. We typically would budget 100 or 200 kids in there. We've taken that down to 0, and we did that to be conservative. We're not expecting a decrease, but at the same time, with some of the numbers we've seen from the refugee resettlement, we just don't expect those numbers to continue to increase, right? So all 3 of those spending authority variables to increase that either are flat or they're not overly positive. Everything else on here, as our speaker alluded to, kind of the compensation number, That 3.28%, for clarification, is total package, okay? Under no circumstances are we alluding or trying to allude that that's take-home pay. And for several of our groups, there was a freeze with the base wages, and that's not lost on anyone. We understand that that's significant. But healthcare costs continue to increase significantly. And what's included in that total package is healthcare cost. So in the future, for our projections, we are factoring in a cost increase to healthcare north of 8%. That's all based on claims experience because we're self-funded. We would love it if it didn't hit 8%, but the reality right now is 8%, 9%, 10% is pretty consistent. Okay, so 3.28% is total package. Of that, every dollar that we spend in our general fund, and again, the spending authority issue is just a general fund issue, for every dollar, 82 cents goes into people, whether that's compensation or benefits. That makes sense. We're an educational institution, we're resource heavy, nobody's challenging that, but it does create strains on that 18% elsewhere. And again, if you go back to 14 million, the fact that we didn't cut 82% directly in compensation is kind of a testament that we really tried to look under every rock we can, okay? We're required in the state of Iowa to present a balanced budget. This is way more math than most people like or appreciate, but essentially what this does is to attempt to say, at $6,800 cost per pupil times the number of pupils that we have in Des Moines Public Schools, we're gonna bring in through the state formula about $224 million. Then you go through the other variables of what did we bring in last year for what's the new money, and it's about $2.6 million in new money this year with 1%. You factor in compensation increases, levies, and we're presenting a budget for this calculation of revenues exceeding 5.8 million. And one might ask themselves, how do you present a budget with revenue higher than expenditures and at the same time make reductions? That seems somewhat counterintuitive. The problem again goes back to spending authority. It really, the reason why we had to do the reduction was specifically to be able to stay within the statute. Okay. This is just another graphical way to show that we've presented, or we are presenting tonight, a balanced budget. You can see total revenue being brought in of $753 million because we're able to include our carryover fund balances, right? Total expenditures we're proposing to go out of $581 million. So as you can tell, our revenue greatly exceeds our expenditures. The property tax rate that we're proposing here tonight is the same property tax rate we had last year out to the 6th decimal point. The reason why we're doing that is because one might ask, if you have a revenue problem, why don't you just increase my taxes? Just increase them $4 and everything's fine. Two problems with that. That would not be well received in the Des Moines community. We don't feel like that's in the best interest of our Des Moines community. The second problem with that one is the way the formula works in the state of Iowa is those taxes go back into the state formula and a portion of them gets redistributed throughout the state. We don't feel like it's responsible to raise taxes for Des Moines citizens and redeploy it to another school district. So we're saying, let's hold flat. Here's what property taxes looked like. And because of that unique relationship between property taxes and revenue, we've held them flat for many years, not a significant change. Here's how property taxes are broken up. Nothing really significant to call your attention to tonight. The management levy increased. We're proposing to increase 30 basis points, 0.3. The reason why we're doing that is because of some of the initiatives we've done with the retirement incentive. We're able to utilize management fund dollars for those type of programs so that we don't have to use general fund dollars. To offset that, to keep our tax rate flat, we reduced our cash reserve levy. This slide is just meant to show in a graphical way, if it's a green smiley face, everything looks wonderful. If it's not a green smiley face, we've got some work to do. It's not meant to offend or upset. It's just meant to show it in as simplistic terms as possible. Sometimes as finance people, this is literally as creative as sometimes we get. So what you can see on here is that the vast majority of the variables we have that we've walked through tonight aren't the most positive, right? We're doing great work to ensure that everything's stable and we can continue on and we can invest in the programs that we need to. But as you can see on each one of these, they're either stable or decreasing slightly. And we've walked through all of these, but just to kind of call your attention on a couple of them, unspent authorized budget, unspent spending authority, essentially interchangeable. It's just a different way to calculate. That's the spending authority issue that we've talked a little bit about tonight. And then the solvency ratio, that's the cash component. The compensation one is essentially, like we've said, for every dollar that we spend, every dollar we get, 82 cents of that goes back into people. The last one is just to show we believe in our people. We believe in investing in talent. We've done everything we can to try to do that. We have not been able to get the support from a revenue generation through the state supplemental aid to offset our compensation increases. That hasn't been there for several years. But we continue to try to invest in those people as best as we can see fit. But again, healthcare does take up a significant portion of that. That's all. What questions or comments?
Are there any questions or comments from the board? Yes, Ms. Langford.
Hello. Yeah, Nick, I just wanted some clarification from the response that we had from Doug on that final slide. Could you explain the discrepancy kind of between the two things that, essentially there's a public claim that there's something that's misleading. Right. So can you respond to that and explain that to the board in terms of that last piece, new money versus the DMEA settlement, and then the difference?
Yeah, the difference kind of really comes to the term of total package versus take-home pay. Doug's absolutely correct that the amount of wages, dollars paid out, is a little over $500,000. There's no dispute there. He and I agree on that completely. The contentious part becomes when people see, and I understand that wasn't what we were going for there, was when you see 3.28%, typically people jump to, oh, they're getting 3.28%, but at my job, I'm only getting 1%. So again, public employees are getting more than me, right? The reality is that the increase in base wages was much lower than the 3.28% of wages take home, but the healthcare component is significant. And healthcare continues to be a bigger and bigger piece every year. Our healthcare expenditures are well over $60 million now, and growing at an 8 to 9% clip. Where our take-home pay, our wages are growing at 1.5%. 1.58 was actually the wage number. So what you could see there, and that's on average throughout the whole district. So I understand where it's coming from, but the total package of what we have to pay out for expenditures is an increase of 3.28%.
Yeah, and another piece that sometimes is confusing if you're not a teacher because you're not used to this, but our teachers are paid on a schedule where you go down a cell for each year of experience and you move across with additional education. So even if there's a 0% increase on the base, if you're here for another year, you get an increase in pay, even though if the negotiated settlement were 0%, everybody who stays another year does get an increase in pay. Mm-hmm. So that just gets confusing to explain sometimes. But the total compensation is how we do negotiations, and that's the people cost is the total compensation, and that's what we were trying to illustrate in that slide.
Sure. If we took away, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. I was just saying two piggyback from questions, but.
Okay, can I, real quick?
Yeah.
So if we were to take away If we were to take away the cost of healthcare and we were just looking at salaries, then what would that percentage difference be?
The average right now for the district is 1.58%.
Okay.
Still greater than the 1% we got from the
Is.
state.
Yeah, Terry, that's a great point.
Half
And-
percent.
And again, that goes back to, that's intentional. We determined that intentional, but we did that so that we can show people that we are trying to invest to the extent we can. And we want to be comparable. We want to be the leader in compensation. We feel like with all the initiatives going on and all the work going on, we need to pay our people for that.
I
Ms.
just
Taylor Gardell Shelley?
Yes, I just had two piggyback questions, and one was, so that 1.58% really affects those staff members particularly that are at it's the bottom when you look at a sheet of paper, but really the top in years of experience, right? Their yearly increase on that base wage is really 1.58% of the base trickled down up the steps, correct?
That's a part of it. The tricky part with the teacher agreement is the 1 to 3 years of experience, not much movement there. And then the 10 through 18, I'm trying to recall, there's not much movement there. It's only through what Dr. Ahart alluded to, where you actually move in the years. The 1.58 is essentially not just DMEA, it's the entire district.
Okay.
Of what we're doing from a base wage perspective.
Okay, the second question is, and I think this might be good for folks following along at home as well. So the 1% SSA, when we talk about that, what's the whole number that is based off of to create that 1% increase? Does that make sense what I'm asking? Is that off the total budget? Is that off the section of the pie we get from the state government? What whole number is that 1% calculated off of?
That's a fantastic question. What that 1% is, it goes into the district cost per pupil. So there was a slide in there where we walked through where I said, sorry, this is really math heavy. That's what the 1% is.
5,000.
Where you get to the 67.
6,000.
Yep.
Okay.
When you get to the district cost per pupil of 6,800, that 1% gets factored in that $6,800 number.
So $68.
Last year we were at 6734. I think I
Okay.
sent the district cost per pupil. Now we're at 6799.
Okay, so it's
Right.
really a difference of like 60 cents per
Yeah.
kid.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then you multiply that by 33,000.
Right, and that's the 1%.
You got it.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem at all.
But that's why no movement in our student population makes a huge difference.
Does. Yeah. For lots of reasons, but absolutely. Absolutely.
Mr. Barron?
No, keep going.
Langford?
Yeah, you said at this point, we're really not looking at decreasing enrollment as an issue in terms of these calculations, but what if our enrollment did begin to decrease?
That's something that we watch extremely closely. And if it does, then we would have to determine,
The projections look different.
the projections look a lot different. Operationally, things look differently. It has a trickle-down effect throughout the organization. We've been able to not have to experience that. And we're seeing enough secondary migration and enough natural births that we still feel like it's going to be flat. You know, I mean, one year we were down 13 children, and that's unfortunate, but with 33,000, we would prefer that we were up 13 or up 1,300, but.
Particularly, so we've had this conversation before in terms of state voluntary diversity plans, in terms of kind of the political climate that's happening. I don't know, it just feels like
Right.
there might be some political factors that could completely change that picture and what it looks like
You
for
are
us.
correct.
And it may,
Absolutely.
and it may be something for us to consider in preparing budgets moving forward, just to have an idea of what that could look like for our district.
Yeah, no, two other notes on that. I'm glad you brought that up. Now is one is what we do know for next year's budget is this year's enrollment. So the next year's funding is based on the prior year's enrollment. So at least that's one for the next year. That's one piece of information, one question mark that's taken away. But you're absolutely right. The other piece is the online initiative that I spoke of earlier. That's one of our strategies to help mitigate the possible negative impacts of some of those political things going on.
Okay.
That's also the reason why we budget all year, and we don't stop.
Any additional questions to my left?
No.
To my right?
Yeah, can you explain the 1.58 again? I'm not quite understanding that.
When we look at every agreement throughout the district, this one particular slide was specifically focused on DMEA, but when we calculate what were wages before versus what wages are going to be under the new negotiated settlement as well as the non-negotiated,
Right.
it comes up to a percentage of 1.58% increase.
So even though they, I thought,
Some folks
they
won't see that
agreed-
through the agreement, right, because of changes in base.
okay.
So
right.
it's just an average across the board.
Okay, so,
Yeah.
right, some will not because they,
If they didn't move a step or a lane
right,
through the negotiated
it's
agreement.
0%.
But everyone moves a step
Right.
if you're a teacher. You automatically move a step every year.
Okay. Right. And actually, I want to thank you for being at every single meeting, and Deb as well. Like, you knocked it out of the park. You were awesome. 11 was high for an average, but thank you very much. You're usually really good at math, so I was surprised at that number.
We're part of the public too, Heather.
Okay, I'll do
Yeah,
that.
I count you guys.
All right.
I do. I count number of eyeballs that we're talking to.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Barron, any questions? Nope. Ms. Ellsburn, any questions?
Just a quick comment, more than a question. Nick mentioned that we had a legislator at our Lincoln meeting. We sent a call out to all the legislators in our local delegation just to let them know that we'd be there. And one representative came, which was great because she asked a lot of great questions, was very candid with her knowledge base. But also what we came to realize very quickly is that our legislators make very uninformed decisions regarding school funding on both sides of the aisle. So that presents a real opportunity for us to do some massive education. Spending authority was a new term. So, you know, maybe there's hope to have that formula looked at some point and at least, at the very least, re-equalized or something. But we did ask Nick to come to our next CLAC coffee to give an abbreviated version of this presentation while we have legislators there, as well as while we have more than 11 in the audience from the community as well. So another opportunity to hear this information, even though we're doing the hearing tonight. So just wanted to mention that.
Great. Any other board questions?
I'm so sorry, Terry.
Yes.
You had mentioned that of the 14 million, 5.5 were staffing.
4.2 million.
Sorry, 4.2.
59 positions net overall, in and out, was the final count where we're at right now.
Okay, so when we talk about the 59 in and out, tonight it's been mentioned that 3 were administration. Can you just kind of, for the public, the number that were operations versus teaching associates, and I think like front office, I think is counted like in that other DMEA section and kind of the AFSCME bargained section. Can you just kind of break down the rest of those? You said 51, so the rest of those 48? Sorry, numbers are not my thing. I've got too many numbers in my head tonight, Nick.
It's all good.
So, before you do that, and I feel like maybe it existed in one of the documents we got this year, but there's a spreadsheet.
It did, yeah.
That the district typically puts together that tracks the trends across the total number of employees and then the number of employees by category annually. And I'm wondering if we could just pull that up and make that available, because that's a great way to track where we are.
There was just a public comment that said 119, and then we got a 50. So I just wanted to make sure that Nick had a chance to address those differences since that was brought up as part of our public comment.
Yeah, a lot of the differences between those two comments just happens to go with in and out and the excess process. And that's why I focus on, from a net perspective, 59 positions throughout the organization, because we needed to ensure we had a little bit around $4 million of staff reductions in order to get to our 14 million and create the rest of the magic for the 10 million. There are several slides on there. The one specifically that we had in our public forum, and we are working to get our public forums out there on the public website so that everyone can see them for those who couldn't attend. But right now we're looking at a total FTE of 4871. I'm sorry, I don't have it in the presentation tonight, so, and I didn't want to be Rain Man and go off of memory, so I'm going to read here. Instructional staff, we went from 2497 to approximately 2468. Support staff went from 412 to 400. Associates, 510 to 487. Specialist, 500 specialist paraprofessionals and clerical, 559 to 534. Food service, operations, transportation, there's always movement in that area. So these are approved positions, authorized positions. It does not mean they're filled. I have to be really clear on that one because there is turnover in these areas. But the positions that are authorized was 856 last year, and there's 856 authorized again this year. Again, doesn't mean that we're going to fill 856. And then administrators, the 3 came about rather recently. So we went from 127 to 124.
Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, Ms. Langford.
I'm not clear on the difference between that 119 number and the 59. That was said, you said that it's sub net versus in and out with the excess. Could you explain that?
When we go through the process of accessing, it does mean that some people will be in a different position than they were before.
Sure.
But it means that they have a position to go to.
Right, no pink slips, but you're not in the same
But
role.
it might mean that they go into a completely different role where they aren't part of a certain bargaining group. It might mean that they choose to leave the district, those kind of things. So that's some of the difference on how the numbers are counted. From a budget perspective, we look at authorized positions, filled positions, because that's how we have to build our large budget. There will always be discrepancies between the two sets, just the way that staffing moves.
Okay.
Does that help?
No, that's, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, Ms. Anderson.
Some might choose to leave the district. Would we fill those positions if they choose to leave?
It depends. If the position was excessed, because like what we spent a significant amount of time talking about in our budget forum was scheduling initiative.
Right.
If that's a position that we felt we want to really look at, and we want to offer it differently, maybe not every semester, maybe every other semester, that might be a position that goes unfilled. It might be a position that we split a teacher up even more to do multiple, as long as they've got all the certifications and endorsements to fill it.
And I don't know if I missed it during your presentation. I could have, I don't know how, but did you cover, like, because earlier it was stated we would have 73 less classrooms? Is that?
That's making an assumption that all teacher reductions mean a classroom reduction, which is not accurate. We have somewhere around 2,700 licensed teachers. Only about 1,500 or so have their own classroom.
The last number.
A lot of coaches and other teachers that don't have what most people consider a traditional classroom position.
The number that I have through our latest reconciliation to get us to the 59 is 27 classroom teachers. And again, largely through a scheduling initiative.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Great questions.
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, these are all things.
So I have just a couple of things. First of all, thank you for clarifying. That graph, we have asked for that every year, so that's sort of a standard thing that's in every single budget presentation. So just make sure you reference that because it exists, and it'll help you just track where our trends are across all employee groups. The other thing, and Nick, I want to make sure that we lift this up again, and you mentioned it earlier, but the board sets policy with regard to the solvency ratio. And the solvency ratio that the board has set by policy is 15%. Over time, there has been some conversation or discussion, and it comes up often, that we should consider reducing the solvency ratio as a budget balancing measure. Can you speak specifically to that as a policy of this board and why 15% makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's several institutions out there that have been doing this work a lot longer than myself that put out a set of benchmarks. So that's one place where the 15% comes up, where they essentially say, if you want to be able to weather the storm through the peaks of when you get your revenue, because June 30th, when we measure that, is our high point. So organizations such as the Government Finance Officers Association, the Association of School Business Officials say it's prudent to maintain a solvency ratio of around 15%. The reason why, from a budget balancing perspective, it doesn't make a lot of sense is because we have a spending authority issue, and taking down the solvency ratio does absolutely nothing from a spending authority perspective. We've already gotten the authority when we got the revenue in. We don't get additional authority if we determine, let's take that solvency ratio down to 10%. The other reason, and you don't have to look far into the district's rearview mirror, where there was a period of time, because that solvency ratio was around 3 to 4%, that they had to borrow short-term to make payroll.
Right.
That is not the type of financial environment we're trying to set in the public schools.
And then what happens when we borrow money?
Right, it counts against our spending authority. From an expenditure perspective, we've got to pay more out. The other thing is it costs us more than our payroll. So
And what does it do to our bonding rating?
it hurts us. The more debt that we have out there, well, that's one of your items coming up, right? And so we've been
I
able to,
want to call people's attention because
Right.
it's real tempting when
It is.
we get into times like this. I appreciate you lifting that up, Terry. You know, what we've been able to do, and this is an important piece that I think all of us are used to, and I think we need to lift this up. But the work that Bill Good's team has done over the last 8 or 9 years in avoiding costs while improving facilities is money that we save in the general fund. And we can do even more of that work if we have a competitive bond rating so that we get more dollars from those bonds from those revenue bonds when we sell them. And that has long-term positive impact on spending authority as well. So I just wanna-
yeah, we want to be rated highly through the rating agencies. That we will all go through that process here over the next 3 board meetings for the next round of bonds. Because the lower the rating, the less amount of proceeds that we can get back, the less amount of proceeds directly translate into the less work we can do in the construction arena, the facilities arena, and the technology arena. So that number is extremely important. And taking that number down, if I look at it from a cost and benefit, you're not gonna really get a benefit. It is gonna cost you, just point blank, right? So not the best idea, in my opinion.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question.
The only other thing that I would mention, do you have another question?
Oh, wait,
No, go ahead.
not a question, it's a statement.
Please go ahead.
I lost this. You said that. I guess I'm just very mindful, knowing that we don't necessarily get huge turnout at our budget forums, that I know we're having conversations as a board amongst each other and our superintendent, but the community may not necessarily always be privy to a lot of things that we're talking about, and they have their concerns as well. And so I do just want to lift up, I know we had some conversations about, accessibility this year in terms of, are there different ways that we could be reaching out to the community? And so I know that the superintendent and the board have been thinking, and you all as staff have been thinking about different ways that we can get, create more access for our community to engage in this process, whether it's through, videos online, live streaming, going out through newsletters in schools, as one board member lifted up, putting things out on the signs in school. So do know that as we're moving forward, that's something that we're looking at. We want our community to be involved in this process, and we realize maybe even, with the Holy Week, that was another concern that was lifted up at Passover, but because of the deadlines in terms of when we have to have our budget certified, and so it makes it a little difficult, but we do want you to know that those are things that we're thinking about as well. That's all.
Absolutely.
Good. So the only other thing that I would offer before we move to a vote is that we spent some time on March 6th at our budget work session talking about how we fund board priorities. And we have 4 board priorities that we've set out: K-5 literacy, algebra, preschool, and males of color. And we had a really good presentation on how this budget supports those priorities, which really sort of goes back to those things that we have identified as key strategies for being able to move the district in the right direction. So I just wanted to lift that up as well for those individuals that were not able to be at the meeting that night or participate somehow, that actually is online for anyone to download, because that's a really important part of how we see our funding supporting those things that we've established as a priority. So we do have a motion, and we actually do not have a motion and a second yet. So if we don't have any additional board questions or comments, I would.
I was just going to say, I just wanted to add, I was trying to unmute, that the questions that I was asking, if you go to the full budget, I did find it on the preliminary budget on page 24 with the tables of the reductions that Nick was referring to. So,
And we put that in, that's a 220-page document. You'll probably find that, if I remember correctly, a few times, and it's a great bedtime story for young children. They love it.
Great. So I would entertain a motion and a second to adopt the proposed budget for fiscal 2019.
I'll move approval.
Second.
We have a motion from Ellsburn and a second from Barron to approve the proposed fiscal 19 budget. Is there any additional discussion, or are there additional questions before we move to the vote? Hearing none, we have a motion and a second on the floor on the proposed fiscal 19 budget. Please vote. Motion passes 6-0. We have a budget that we can now certify and send off to Polk County. So thank you, Nick, for all of your hard work and the staff. We appreciate everyone's efforts.
It's an extremely collaborative process, and it's not just limited to business and finance. It takes the entire district to set this budget, including the guidance from you guys, so I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for all your efforts. We appreciate it greatly.
Thanks, Nick.
All right. Next item on our agenda this evening is item number F1, open enrollment late applications for denial. I would ask Dr. Ahart to please introduce this matter.
Yeah, what you'll find is the timely applications for open enrollment for the 18-19 school year. This is a longer attachment than you typically receive, but this is the one time when they're all timely, because these are the ones that have come in for next year prior to the March 1st deadline.
I think might be.
That's not the one.
Yeah, I think you might be.
Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped down. My apologies.
Okay.
Lost track of my mouse there. These are what you see in F1, now that I'm in the right place, are the late applications for denial. There are two cases for your review. These were denials made based on state code after our staff review.
I don't believe we have any speakers on this item this evening, so I would entertain a motion and a second to deny the open enrollment late applications identified by case number in the agenda based on Iowa code and district policy.
So moved.
We have a motion from Ellsburn and a second from Anderson. Are there any questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, please vote. Motion passes 6-0. The next item on our agenda is item number F2, monitoring report on preschool, part 1. Dr. Ahart?
Thank you. We have a pair of Susies for you this evening. Susie Tallman and Susie Guest. Susie number 1 is our executive director of elementary programming, and as you all know, Susie Guest oversees all of our pre-K programming. This seems late for the first of a two-part series, but in order to have data that was complete for the first half of the year, we really needed to have the report this late. For those of you at home thinking, what have we been doing? The end of the first semester doesn't happen until close to the end of January. And those of you familiar, especially with the GOLD assessment, know that's an extremely labor-intensive process. And so to give an accurate report on the first half of the year, we need to do it a little bit past the first half of the year. So with that, Susie?
So we'll be giving you an update on student achievement progress in preschool and share where we're heading as an early childhood department. In the presentation, we'll be covering trends in our analysis as well as what are some of our challenges and barriers. So what are the key performance indicators of progress in preschool? We're looking at if students are ready for kindergarten in the areas of literacy, math, and social emotional development, as well as if parents and families are engaged in the education of their children. So we'll be taking a deeper look at each of these and the progress that we've made, as well as what our next steps are. So just a reminder, we're looking at our FAST and MAP data. These are screeners that identify students who are at risk. They also, they also over-identify students as well. And the data that we're presenting and sharing with you is only utilizing the first assessment that's given in the fall in September. So here is our FAST kindergarten composite, and you can see over time the progress that has been made in the fall when assessing students each year. Our projection for 2017 was having 66% of kindergarten students that were meeting benchmarks on FAST. However, the data that did come in this fall was actually 63.66%, so we didn't meet the 66% benchmark, but remained fairly consistent with the same progress that we made at the beginning of the fall in 2016. I think the tough part about that is, each year we get a new group of students coming in with different experiences, different background, and different exposure to things. So sometimes they're coming in with varying experiences and needs. However, if you take a look at the next slide, when looking at our subgroups and breaking it down as far as students that attended DMPS preschool and compared to students that did not, you can see in literacy, preschool made some significant gains in progress. Biggest gains are in free and reduced, ELL, and with our African American students. I think one of the things that we probably, actually Susie and her team has done very well in regard to literacy, we've had the FAST screener in place for a few years now, so they've been able to dig into that data, identify specific skills then that they are targeting, providing training to staff in order to better support and teach students. And so I think what you're seeing over time is the trend is showing you that students are acquiring more knowledge and skills in regard to literacy over the past few years. When looking at our MAP trends, we're specifically focusing in on math. We only have fall of 2016 data as well as fall of 2017. So you see where we came in as far as 35.50 students meeting benchmark. Our projection for this fall was 37%. However, we came in lower than that at about 4% lower at 31.6%. And when you're looking at overall, our K-5 students, we also in math, that was an area where we saw a decrease. Now, even though we only have a year's worth of data, I'll go to the next slide, dig in a little bit more and take a look at our subgroups. And it shows that students that attended DMPS preschool compared to those who did not did show increases in gains, not as significant as literacy. I think one of the things we've shared in previous presentations is that we've identified math as a growth area in preschool, and we have data to back that up where we are seeing some trends with that. And so Susie will be talking a little bit more about that during her portion of the presentation. We also utilize the GOLD assessment, and this is mandated by the state, and I would have to say that this is really probably the data that drives the work of the preschool department and the work of teachers, because they're looking at this data, it's more leading data versus lagging data, and looking at it 3 times throughout the year. With the gold assessment, we're taking a look at literacy, math, and social emotional development, but what we're able to do is dig into more specific skills. We're looking at more data points, which gives us better information on students, so that we can be more targeted in regard to our response to the data and how we're supporting children in the classrooms. So when looking at our fall to winter data, we did make some significant increases in literacy by 50%, math by 40%, and social emotional by 49%. One of the other things I'd like to highlight is from spring 2016 to spring 2017, we did overall increase by 2% in our projected.
Want to move the
Oh, I'm
slide?
sorry, did I not move that again? I apologize. I'm sorry, did I need to go back?
No,
Okay,
you're right.
did I get that?
There you go.
Okay, so that was the map data that I just covered.
Yeah, I don't think there is a slide for
I
this
don't think
data.
that, yeah,
We
you must
don't,
be
because
just,
you have that in your report.
yeah, it's,
So this is just highlighting, and then our projected goal is 89% for gold assessment in the spring. So the table that I was talking about earlier was this one in regard to MAP, when we're looking at math by subgroup.
it's in your monitoring report.
Yeah.
Table
Okay,
It's in
3.
the actual, table 3.
Table 3.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, I'll turn it over to Susie.
Okay. In addition to literacy, math, and social emotional development, our fourth key performance indicator is parent engagement. And one of the reasons we have parent engagement as a KPI is that it is required of our funding. Head Start funding, statewide voluntary preschool, Early Childhood Iowa, our family supports funding, they all require that we monitor this data. And so we have lots of different opportunities for our parents to engage, and also have lots of educational opportunities for them. Some examples are Coffee and Connections, and I've talked to you a little bit about some of these. That's once a month at each of our sites, and it is more of a kind of a drop-in. Parents can drop in, we provide them resources, we provide them educational opportunities. For example, in May, one of the things we're going to be focusing on is bike safety, and so we usually get some helmets donated, so we'll raffle those off. We'll also make a brain out of Jell-O that kids and parents, it's very engaging, but it's also very educational. So we'll do that. That's Coffee and Connections. We have conferences, just like all of our K-12. We have in spring and in fall. We also have home visits, which is a little bit different than K-12, and that is mandated by our performance standards as well. We have family events at each of our sites, one in the fall and one in the spring. We have Pack Time, and it's one of the greatest events. It's a weekly event, and it stands for Parent and Child Together. And every week, we invite the parents into the classroom, and we invite them 15 minutes before pickup time. And we introduce them to our curriculum each week, what we're working on, and we have them prepare an activity with their child. And the teacher facilitates it in the classroom, then we send that activity home so that we can extend that learning into the home. So that's our Pack Time, and that happens weekly. We also rely on parent surveys to help us guide what we're doing as far as family engagement. For example, in the fall, after registration, one of the questions we ask the parents is, how was that registration process? We try to gather as much information as we can, and then we make adjustments based on their input. Another survey that we just started this year is called the Family Strengths Survey. And this survey, it's a pre and post self-assessment. So parents take it in the fall, and we focus on, they include areas such as housing and employment and money management and food and clothing, health coverage, childcare, those types of things. Based on the information that they provide us, we create educational opportunities for our families. All parents are invited to come to those educational opportunities, but if a parent specifically puts down that they would like more information on a certain subject, then we will send them a personal invitation to attend, because we're trying to reach out to them. That's what they need. And what we will be doing is at the end of the year, we'll do a post-assessment as well, so we can see, did we make a difference? Did our families become stronger because of the opportunities that we're providing them? And so that's the whole point in starting this family strength survey. Some of the educational opportunities that we've already had this year for parents: positive solutions for families, and that's usually around behavior for kids. Parenting Way, to talk about best strategies in parenting. A literacy education with the Des Moines Public Library, focusing on simple steps. DART outreach, where DART came to the parents and actually taught them how to use their services. We had a first aid class for parents, CPR class for parents that our nurses did, and then a financial boot camp along with Evelyn K. Davis Center. So, and those were really all created as a result of what our parents asked for. So hopefully we'll see some increases in the strength survey, and then I'll be able to report those to you this summer when I come back for part 2. I think that our data shows, our parent-teacher conferences, 95% of our families attend, and that's, conferences as well as home visits, and that's been consistent over the past several years. So I think that's been very successful. Our PAC time, where parents come in once a week into the classroom and learn about our curriculum, over half of our parents attend. So we're very excited about that. In our Coffee and Connections, where parents can drop in, stay as long as you want, or as short as you want, we have a fourth of our parents that are attending those. So along with all of our key performance indicators, there are barriers and challenges that we encounter. And the first area that I want to talk about is instruction. So currently we have 2 instructional coaches for about 80 teachers across the district. Okay, doesn't seem like enough or much, but it is. I mean, it's a real balance. Our funding sources, providing instructional coaches, that's an allowable expense. Okay, so what we have to do, though, is any support staff that we fund, the number of students that we can educate decreases, because you have to have a roster of students in order to generate the funding, and our coaches don't have that roster. So it's really a balance. Can we get the work done with 2 coaches? And we have found so far, it's, I'm sure that if we could provide more coaching, that we may see improvements, but we do have to balance that out with the number of kids we need to serve. And we currently have waiting lists, especially on the south side. Enrollment, I just talked with our enrollment office yesterday. Mitchell AM is already full. This for next year. This is April. So that's where we have to make those balances. We've got to be able to serve the kids. We have to support teachers, and so that's what we do. Second area, or challenge in the area of instruction, is the level of teacher knowledge or experience in teaching math, and our data shows that. Our data shows that our teachers need more instruction with math, and we are providing that PD, but we also surveyed the teachers, and they are not as comfortable. They are not as comfortable as they are with literacy, and they were very honest about that, so that's a challenge. Third challenge is the student exposure to technology. All of our kids this year now do have technology. But there is a difference when they go and take that MAP assessment in the fall as kindergartners. They have to do that independently. And that is a challenge. And so I think that's one of the reasons we're looking at changing assessment for our kindergartners, because I don't know that you can expect 5-year-olds to do that, and I think our data shows that. So. In the area of professional development, we have some challenges, and The first would be prioritizing our professional development based on the data and teacher need. We have lots of priorities. We have literacy, we have math, and then we have all of our district initiatives as well, our instructional framework, equity, MTSS, SRG. So how do you balance all of those and prioritize all of those without overwhelming the teachers? Okay, so that's something that we always have to think through. And then additionally, because we provide, the early childhood leadership team provides the professional development, how do we prioritize so we're not overwhelmed as well, in addition to doing all of our other jobs? So that's something that we have to balance, and we do, but it's just something we have to be cognizant of, not to overwhelm our teachers as well as our team. And then our next area is the area of monitoring. I think unless you're monitoring for implementation, you're not going to get the results that you want to get. So this year, we've really placed our focus on monitoring. So during professional development, whatever it is we're working on, that month after the professional development, we'll go into the classrooms and we'll monitor to see how we're doing. Okay. And what we find is we're doing very well. Then we change the subject areas. So let's say first we were focusing on the critical content, and this time we're focusing on recording and representing knowledge. That might go up, but then critical content goes down. So it's balancing that, and how do you sustain the progress that you've made? So those are things that we always need to be thinking about. Also, consistency in behavior reporting. Any of our behavior incidents we put into Infinite Campus, and in monitoring our data there, you take a look. One teacher might think that this behavior rose to the occasion or to the level that it needs to be a behavior incident report, yet this teacher didn't. Goes back to your professional development, that we need to make sure that everybody is putting the data in consistently with integrity, and there's more professional development that we need to do. And then lastly, we talked about GOLD, Teaching Strategies GOLD, and that's what's mandated by the state. Well, over the last several years, we've been able to compare data from year to year. This year, Teaching Strategies GOLD has changed the platform. And what that means is they've added objectives in some places, taken away objectives in others, and also changed the levels. So what might have been, you may have leveled a student in this particular objective that was kindergarten ready for the last 5 years, but now this year they changed it. And so they're not kindergarten ready. So one of the challenges we have that we will be working with Teaching Strategies on is, I want to be able to continue to compare year to year to year, and I don't know that we're going to be able to do that because of the change in their platform. So that's a little concerning. We'll work on that, and again, I'll let you know about that in July. Questions?
Questions for Susie or Susie? One or two? Yes.
I don't have a question, but actually, I love your parent engagement strategies. I think, wow, you're doing a great job. And it seems like, I don't know, it's just a great way to start their educational journey, I guess. Like, hopefully we can just keep that going, I guess.
Other questions or comments? Yes, Ms. Langford.
Yeah, I am super excited to say in my other hat that I get to wear, my full-time job, I got to go and be at the Jesse Franklin Taylor's Coffee and Connections.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, and it was so cool to see just how the staff were interacting with families and they were just stopping through getting, but it was really cool to see that a lot of families were taking advantage of that and how people were thinking outside of the box. And the survey that you all are doing with families at the beginning of the year, going into the homes, meeting families, it was just really cool to see that work happening firsthand.
The teachers do a great job.
Yeah.
And the support staff, they really do.
That was evident.
Yeah.
That was really evident. So I just wanted to lift that up. I did have a couple questions. Mm-hmm. The first is, what was the rationale for not including special education students in this report?
That's just what we've done from year to year to year, so it was just to keep it consistent. We could, though, we can.
I mean, that would have to be a board. I'm learning. Individual board member, thoughts do not necessarily mean it translates into a full board, conversation. But I am personally interested in learning a little bit more when those inequities start, right? Or when, and I don't know if any other board members are.
Let me take a look too at some of the monitoring reports, because I think they did have special ed broken out as a subgroup.
Yep.
In the reports that were on the monitoring report.
At the preschool level, and the gold data includes special education. You're talking about the MAP and the FAST data at the kindergarten level.
Yeah, sorry, I should have been specific.
That is not.
But I guess that's not preschool, so that would make sense in terms of why you are, okay. That makes sense.
Is there a challenge to an identification? So some of your FAST data is like September, and some of these kids aren't identified and
That's
have
correct.
IEPs yet, right?
Same with any of our ELL students.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. My bad then on that. The second question I had is you mentioned several initiatives, and I was wondering if you could list them again. I caught MTSS,
Sure, well, right
They're
now.
the same as the district priorities,
Yeah.
so MTSS, SRG, instructional
Equity.
framework, and cultural proficiency and equity.
And then in addition to that, we have an outside consultant coming in once a month that is working with teachers on math,
Got it.
because our scores were indicated that that's what we needed to do. So.
And I know that's across the board. I guess we hear teachers saying it's a lot, which we know that that's a lot in education that teachers are dealing with. So I guess I'm just wondering from your perspective with our preschool students, like how you're finding that balance, and kind of is there an emphasis area that's taking particular priority this year with you all?
The instructional framework, we're really focusing on the strategies on the instructional framework. And they lend themselves really to all subject areas. Okay, so there are strategies on that instructional framework that you can use in math or literacy. And so those are our two areas of focus. But it was really our data that drove the math professional development.
Right.
But I would also add that Susie and her team participate in all of the trainings that we have. And so one of the things that they do is a lot of work on the front end as far as taking information and really designing it to specifically fit early childhood, because there are some differences. However, doing that work on the front end, I think kind of helps focus that more for staff as well, when they're providing and streamlining the work for any training or PD that they receive.
So for example, if you're taking the strategy and the instructional framework that is representing knowledge and recording knowledge, as you first grade on up, even kindergarten, it's about teaching kids to represent their own knowledge. Well, in preschool, it's about us facilitating that for our preschoolers. That's why we provide our own professional development. Because as what Susie's saying is that we attend all of the district initiatives, and then we take that, and you just have to kind of tweak it a little bit.
Sure.
Because even you want everything to be student directed. That's our goal with the instructional framework, is we want this to be student directed, but at preschool, you really can't.
Right.
I mean, you'll start out at the beginning of the year completely adult directed. As you move towards the end of the year, yes, you can see how they can follow those routines and follow those directions and start carrying on, and they know what to do in their centers. So preschool's just a little bit different because of that.
Thank you.
Other board questions? Mr. Barron?
I just want to, I have a quick question, but I also want to speak to you from the consumer angle, having a preschooler this year, that it's interesting to hear the data and to think about the gold and how you explain the gold, because we went through that and we looked at my son's data, and the teacher walked us through it, and it's gone great. And I think he's ready for college, so I think that's good. But we just did our budget for the year, and a lot of time was spent on a on a graph representing the way positions are going to be either reduced or augmented in the next year. And when we were looking at that, I noticed under certified instructional staff, there is a reduction in preschool teachers in positions from 34 to 29 and a half. And I know we struggle to, or that we don't lack for need. So, we're filling all of our classrooms. So can you kind of explain?
That's a reduction in Head Start.
Okay.
Basically because of funding. Our Head Start funding has not increased over the last several years. And so this year we did ask for an increase in funding, and we did not receive everything that we needed. In fact, we received half.
Actually, not even half. But
Yeah. And so.
Not even half of what we asked for, or not even half of what we've gotten last year?
Of what we asked for.
So, okay.
Yep, we received. So the way Head Start, at least this is the way the Drake has explained to us, is that if they're unable to give us more money, then our only resolution is to cut slots. So that's what we had to do.
Okay.
So those are Head Start slots.
That's awful.
so
It
this,
impacts some of our most at-risk
Right,
students.
it's also frustrating, and I don't mean to be, it's so frustrating because the two sides of the coin here are, we compensate our preschool staff, including our Head Start staff, much better than the other Drake programs and outlying areas. And so we tend to attract some of those good folks to our district, and they tend to stay with us. On the other hand, we spend much less money per pupil than the other Head Start programs outside of Des Moines. And so we could be serving a lot more students, and that if we could just get a bigger chunk of the pie, we would serve a lot more students than would forego the service. But it's a constant ongoing debate and argument that we have with Drake.
Anything else? Any other questions from board members? Yes, Ms. Anderson, and then we'll go to Ms. De La Gardelle Shelley.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. When you were talking about the kindergartners taking the math test, I mean, I think that's ridiculous, sorry. What is like another option that you're thinking about instead?
I believe it.
Maybe you don't know.
Well, I believe that it's called FastBridge.
Oh,
And-
FastBridge, okay.
Right, and the difference is that FastBridge is actually given to the students one-on-one.
Oh, okay,
And so it's
know
much
that.
more developmentally appropriate.
right. That will, of course, take more time for the teacher.
It's pretty short.
Better information on students.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. Okay, thanks.
Ms. De La Gardelle Shelley.
Yeah, I just wanted to raise up, when you're talking about preschool math, professional development, and how comfortable the preschool teachers feel with math, I'm assuming that in teacher preparatory programs, there's a very strong emphasis on literacy development as it relates to, phonetics and the alphabet and all of these things. So I guess this is not really so much a question for you, but just really raising up, because I know we've brought up at the board table before the communication that we might have with teacher preparatory programs and different needs. And so I was just wondering if we could raise up that maybe that could be a conversation that we could add to that. And then I'm also certain we probably have teachers on the blue contract. So I guess, do your blue teachers, are they receiving additional, do we have blue teachers in preschool?
We do have blue teachers in preschool.
Is any part of their program related to helping them become leaders in math instruction for preschool?
I don't know that.
Okay.
I could find out. But one of the things I do know is that Des Moines Public Schools was very fortunate back in, I want to say 2007 and 2008, that we were the recipient of an early reading first grant. And at that time, we had internationally recognized professor that was here once a month working with our teachers. And I honestly believe that's why our literacy component is as strong as it is.
Okay. So it's not necessarily that we're weak in math, we're just really strong in literacy.
And they're very comfortable with literacy.
Yeah, but I'd also say that the results you got from your survey are common at the elementary level generally,
well?
generally
Okay,
speaking.
okay.
Right.
So that's why we've done a number of things we have a partnership with Drake and Grandview that was started last year specifically to support our elementary teachers in building their efficacy and STEM-related instruction. We have a couple of partnerships, the TriNect program, and I'm not thinking of the other one with Iowa State, to support our teachers, elementary level teachers, in strengthening their comfort level and expertise in math and science instruction. Because to your point, literacy is really hot, and it's a lot easier to find expertise at the college level in literacy instruction at the elementary level than it is with math. So to your point, when Grandview a few years ago had the opportunity to hire a professor in elementary education, and talking with President Henning, he said, he says, do you know somebody who's really good in literacy? And I said, yes, but have you considered maybe investing those dollars in a math position? Because that's really where we're struggling. Not Des Moines exclusively, it's just that we underemphasize, our college preparatory programs tend to emphasize literacy, sometimes at the expense of math.
Yeah, and as an information and library professional, I would just also like to raise up that there are different types of literacy, that when we talk about this, we are talking about the literacy that's just kind of everyone colloquial knows as, books and words, but we can talk about health literacy, we could talk about financial literacy, we could talk about math literacy. And so I think some of this is also just changing the conversation around what are the skills that our students need to be literate in beyond just, reading, which is so important because we all know at third grade, there's a shift in how we teach reading and what kids are expected to do with their reading, but just, to raise up that point as well.
Additional board questions? So I just had one, and I'm going back to the conversation we had in July of last year on the early childhood report. And I can't remember if we settled on including data from partner programs, and if that's included here.
It is. In your monitoring report, we actually broke it out because of that conversation. So we broke it out into DMPS programs, our partners. And what that shows is really we have outstanding partners. Because in some respects, we are right there side by side. And then we also have the third column, the bar graph, that shows other preschools. That might be like Little Scholars that are actually preschools. And then we have the column that says no preschool. And you can see, the advantage that students have that attended Des Moines Public Schools, one of our partner programs, and even some of those other programs that aren't a partner, but they are identified preschools.
Thank you. I see it right here.
Yes.
Didn't quite get to that particular document, so appreciate that. That'll be helpful, I think, especially for the partner preschools in sharing information that typically they may or may not be able to share, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions?
Actually,
Yes.
to that end, and to the way that the mining report itself is presented, so when you come back with a second version of this, in the PowerPoint, you noted what your projections were, like for FAST, and but then those are not represented in the bar graph that you put into the mining report. And there's because there's the different breakouts, there's 4 different bars for each category. So at the risk of adding a 5th bar, it is helpful, I think, from the board perspective to be able to see what the district projected and then compare that to results.
Oh, okay.
So for that, and that's just all students.
And that's the one on the monitoring report.
Correct. Not the PowerPoint. I'm referencing the PowerPoint because there's the goal was 66% for fall FAST, and that's in here. But then if you look at the monitoring report, you don't actually see the comparison that we're at 62.21 or I know that's not.
We can do that.
Okay. Appreciate it.
Any additional board questions or comments? Since this is a multiple-part monitoring report, we will not be taking action tonight, but we appreciate you being here. Great information. Thank you.
Yes.
Good seeing you.
Nice to see you too. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Susie's.
Okay, moving on to item number F3, statewide penny sales tax bond series 2018. I'll ask the superintendent to open up the item and to introduce it, and we'll move from there.
I recommend that the board take action giving authorization for the sale of the school infrastructure sales services and use tax revenue bond, Series 2018, by adopting the resolution fixing the date of sale not to exceed $65,700,000 school infrastructure sales service and use tax revenue bond, Series 2018, approving electronic bidding procedures, and approving official statement. As I think most of you recall, we've been talking about this for some time. This, until, I'm going to be positive, until the governor signs the extension of the statewide penny, this will be the last time we go back to the bond market for revenue bonds related to the statewide sales tax. So keep the pressure on the legislature and the governor until that deal is done.
Great. So we do not have a presentation on this item, and I don't believe we have any speakers. So I would ask for a motion to approve the adoption of the resolution as detailed in attachment 18043. And the attachment goes into great detail with regard to the bond sale. And these are, again, revenue bonds, not general obligation bonds, but revenue bonds. So I would entertain a motion in a second to approve the resolution or adopt the resolution.
I move approval.
Second.
We have a motion from Barron and a second from De La Gardelle Shelley. This requires a roll call vote, so I will ask the secretary to call the roll.
Ms. De La Gardelle Shelley?
Yes.
Ms. Langford?
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. Ellsburn?
Yes.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
And Mr. Barron?
Yes.
I declare the resolution adopted by a vote of 6-0. Go forth and do good.
All right, thank you.
All right, so that concludes all of our regular action items. We do have several items for information in our board packet. Decisions on open enrollment applications for 2018-19 school year. The award of a quote 8115 for the Harding Middle School restroom remodeling and the preliminary plans for retaining wall addition at Stowe Elementary. So if you have any questions, you can direct those to the individuals listed as the contact on that particular item. So we'll now move to items of privilege. Are there any items that board members have before I go to my report? Okay. Well, again, I want to thank Nick and Deb and everyone for all of the extra time that they put into the budget forums. It was a full week and a Saturday, so we appreciate everyone's effort. And also to my board colleagues, we came out in force, so I appreciate everyone's attendance and being there to not only receive the public that we received, even though there were 12 including us, but I think, again, it's really important for us to be there when we invite the public, and I just appreciate everyone's efforts. And I'd also like to recognize my board colleague, Rob Barron. Front cover of 40 Under 40. Recognition was last Thursday, and Deanna and I had the wonderful opportunity to be there to celebrate Rob's accomplishments, so
Which was the highlight of the
congratulations.
evening.
It was highlight of the evening, right. So congratulations, Rob, and we really do want to commend you for being recognized in a stellar class of individuals who are 40 years of age or younger. It's hard for me to even say that.
Believe it. Believe it. I got a birth certificate to prove it, long form and everything.
So at any rate, I'll pass the publication around, but there's a nice piece in it that really sort of highlights Rob's accomplishments and is just a profile on him. So congratulations, and again, we just appreciate you representing us in such a fine way.
Thank you.
I don't have anything else, so I'll turn it over to the superintendent.
I just want to make a brief comment. Our CFO, as I referenced earlier, Thomas Harper, who's an outstanding person, but an outstanding CFO, has been suffering from a heart condition now for closer to 4 months than 3 now, and just ask everyone to keep him in your thoughts and prayers as he's taken what appears to be a bit of a turn for the worse in the last couple of days, and he's struggling, and he's served the district exceedingly well, and just keep positive thoughts coming his way. On a more positive note, I got an email from one of our teachers at North sharing with me that our fine senior at North, Robert Nishimwe, who many of you know, got accepted into his first choice of universities, Georgetown University.
Outstanding.
And I received a note from Robert saying he's having a little difficulty getting the appropriate paperwork, long story behind that, for his FAFSA. And he's afraid he's going to miss the financial aid deadline. And one of these small world connections, I said, well, a good friend of mine happens to be the vice president of student affairs at Georgetown University. I think we can help you out. So made that connection today, so I think everything's going to be good. And he will represent DMPS well beyond the boundaries of Georgetown in the near future. So I'm really proud of him and the fine work that the staff at North and around the district have done to support Robert and students like him. So that was a fun one today.
Great, that's excellent. And our thoughts and prayers do extend to Thomas. He has been outstanding, and so much of what we were able to accomplish tonight is due to all of the pre-planning and work that he has done, actually since the moment he arrived here at the district.
Absolutely.
He's really taken our financial focus to a completely different level and brought a level of professionalism, integrity, and expertise to that work. So hats off to him for that, but again, definitely keep him in our thoughts and prayers. Yeah. So, all right, with that, we will conclude our meeting and very quickly move to our work session. Without objection, our meeting is adjourned.